Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who want to do more than just survive. I'm Liz Frericks, and this is my husband, Evan.
Good morning.
And we're so glad you guys are here with us on this wonderful Tuesday.
Yeah, thanks for joining us and spending part of your day with us. If you enjoy this episode, please do share it with a friend.
So this week, we are talking about leadership, and today's CSC is surrender. So we thought we'd talk about suffering and following in Jesus' footsteps.
Yeah, and I wonder if people, yesterday we talked about everybody being called to leadership. So we're all called to participate in this particular kind of suffering.
Right.
And I wonder if people think about that. So some examples of this kind of suffering are any leadership role, we're really putting aside some amount of our own personal safety and our own kind of agenda for someone else. I mean, that's
right.
Good leadership is for the benefit of those being led. Obvious example would be parenting, but, there's also things like pastors or like a scout leader, a troop leader, or a coach, you're doing this for them. And there's going to be some suffering that comes along with that.
Well, and I think, too, it can be hard to lead when you're in the middle of suffering. Like, one of the things I wrote down is, how can we lead if we're barely treading water? I think it's easy to get stuck in this mindset that we have to be perfect and have our lives totally together before we can be leaders.
Yeah, that's true. So we might think, well, I'm suffering so much already. How can I take more on?
Right, yeah. We just already feel overwhelmed and stressed out, and it feels like too much.
But I think if we're going to be honest with ourselves and with our relationship with God, we're going to realize that we've been chosen to be leaders by God.
Right.
And that's an important part of our faith. So we've got to try to answer with the big yes, whatever comes next.
Right. Well, and I think, we have this misconception that suffering is a problem in leadership when really that's how we minister. Like, that's how we lead, is through suffering. Paul talks a ton about this throughout 2 Corinthians. It's one of my favorite books of the Bible, just because he goes over and over and over this concept. And there's a couple places that I wanted to reference. One is 2 Corinthians, starting in chapter 1, verse 3. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. For just as the sufferings of Christ flow over into our lives, so also, through Christ, our comfort overflows. If we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer. And our hope for you is firm, because we know that just as you share in our suffering, so also you share in our comfort. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers, about the hardships we suffered in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. Indeed, in our hearts we felt the sentence of death. But this happened, that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us. And so, there's this, in a lot of ways, suffering is kind of a bridge that we walk across in order to lead. Just like, I think you were talking about it yesterday, like you want people who show their anxiety a little bit to be leaders.
Sure.
Because if you can't relate to your leaders, you don't trust them enough to lead you. I don't know, we just, as humans, we need that kind of connection. And as we suffer ourselves and God comforts us, that's when we have an opportunity to then spread that comfort around, to have his comfort overflow into our lives.
Yeah. I mean, we really lose our ability, our effectiveness as leaders if we get too hung up on this, like, where's all this suffering come from? Or why aren't things going my way? Right. Why is this so difficult? Like, I mean, those are important questions to ponder, but at some point we've also got to be like, okay, this is the way it is. I mean, obviously from that passage there. We've got lots of other examples of leadership being hard.
Right.
And I think anytime I'll just say it for me, anytime I've been in a leadership position, I've found it to be way less glamorous than I thought it was going to be anyway. So it's not like, I guess it seems like it should be glamorous, and then you get into the position like if you're a parent, you become a parent, you're up in the middle of the night and you're getting thrown up on and pooped on and peed on, and it's just like, wow, this is pretty awesome, right? And it's, or, being in the elder boardroom at church, it's like, oh, this is some guys sitting around praying and trying to follow Jesus together. I mean, that's pretty awesome, but it's not like, I don't know, maybe we see leadership in movies or something, and I think it's something else, and that's not really it either. So if we're hoping for that, that's going to amplify any little suffering that comes along too, because our expectations are in the wrong place.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the best leaders are the people that have been in the trenches. So this week for school, we do daily 6 trait writing, and the exercise was to write about a museum that you make up. And their example museum was the Museum of Socks.
Oh.
And so you had to write about a specific exhibit in your museum, and it was historical socks. Uh-huh. And so they had like George Washington's socks, and then their imaginary facts about them, that they were the socks that he wore while he was crossing the Delaware, and that they were brown wool, and that they were a little holy, and that they were covered in mud because, sure. That was what the Revolutionary Army, they didn't have the best supplies, and they were doing a lot of marching. And then they had Martin Luther King Jr.'s socks, and how, they're white cotton, but they're worn out from marching. And they're the ones that he wore during his I Have a Dream speech, right. But I just love those pictures of leaders who were, participating with their followers. They're not just like up in this ivory tower. They're getting down in the trenches, getting dirty, mm-hmm. wearing out their socks,
Yeah. If I do have that idea of like, oh, leadership is, I guess I keep coming back to glamorous, but trying to think of like maybe a dictator where it's like, oh, look, they have all this power. They have all this kind of, they demanded respect through intimidation and things. Real good leadership is wear your shoes and socks out kind of in the trenches with everybody.
Yeah, I think, sometimes when we're like, why is this happening? It's because we can be better leaders because of our suffering. I was thinking about in 2 Corinthians 10, I'll start in verse 7. Paul says, "To keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan, to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardships and persecutions and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" And that's where God is at work. That's where the rubber meets the road, is in those hardships and sufferings and weaknesses. And if we get rid of sufferings and hardships and weaknesses,
what are we doing?
There's nothing left, right? Like, there's no way for us to be a good leader. Like, that's the pathway to being a good leader, is embracing those things, letting God transform us and empower us, and, to have that be where God says, "My strength is made perfect in your weakness."
Mm-hmm. So I think the takeaway is, and we're building on yesterday, and we'll be kind of progressing all week, is, so we're called to leadership. Cool, got that. And now setting the expectation right of, it's not going to be a cakewalk. And
right.
I shouldn't expect it to be, because then it's just going to be even worse of a cakewalk. But to be like, God, what's a realistic expectation here? And even if, let's just go in with no expectations, and let's expect it to be difficult.
Right.
And we'll expect that I'll have to continue trusting you to obey with this thing you want me to do.
Right. And I'm not going to wait until I'm outside of suffering before I try to be a leader.
Yeah.
Because suffering is just part of life. It's part of living in a broken world. And that is where God is working. Suffering is not an obstacle to being a good leader. It's the pathway to being a good leader.
Right. And leadership is a part of life. I mean, that's the amazing part about living in a society where there's old people and middle people and young people all the time. And like, there's always new babies to be born. You're always getting older. There's always someone you can mentor. There's always someone who can mentor you. Like, that's just how it works. We are leading, whether we realize it or not. There's people watching and taking your example.
Right. And it doesn't have to be this big, huge thing. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow. As always, pick whether today is going to be awesome or not, whether you're going to strengthen those neural pathways to look for good things or to look for the not so good things in your life. Because just like it says in Proverbs, as a man thinks in his heart, so shall he be. If you set your system to look for the negative things, your life will be more and more negative.
Imagine that.
Yeah, it's amazing. We love you guys, and we are praying for you. Thanks to everybody that's been listening to the show and sharing the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this episode helpful, please do share it. And like I said, come back tomorrow and we're going to talk about how leadership is in the small things.
All right, we'll talk to you then.
Have a great Tuesday, you guys.